You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Who is your favorite Celestial? Why does the Watcher have the same haircut as Will? And why is Will talking in third person? All these questions and more in this episode of Systematic Geekology. Hello, friends. We are glad that you are here on another episode of Systematic Geekology. We are your priests to the geeks. I'm one of your priests, Will Rose. And when we say priest, if this is your first episode, we don't necessarily mean that everyone who is a host or guest on this show is necessarily a priest. But what we mean by that is that we are the mediators, the facilitators between those things which we geek out on and the bigger questions around philosophy and theology and religion and faith. And so we have a pretty fun episode here for you today to kind of dig into those things, dig a little deeper. And I'm with some fellow hosts and friends that I'm really glad to be a part of this episode. So, Josh, welcome back. It's been a moment. Glad you're back on
It's been a while.
Systematic Geekology. What have you been up to, and what are you geeking out on?
Oh, I've been up to finishing up school, but what I've been geeking out on recently, other than getting to go visit a friend of mine where he lives and seeing his local comic book store and his local game store and how nice both of them are, my other thing is that I have been going back through Doctor Who, starting with the Ninth Doctor and going forward, in preparation for this upcoming return of David Tennant.
Nice. So you actually have a friend who owns a comic book store and a game store?
No. I went up to visit my friend and went to his local stores.
Oh, gotcha. I thought you said like you went to his store and saw where he geeks out. That's fine. I thought you were like, man, if you have a connection who owns a literal comic book store, it's like,
No, not quite.
And then we have Kevin Schaefer, a friend of mine from here in North Carolina, been a guest on the show before. He's back with us to talk some Marvel Universe stuff. We have similar tastes and geek out on things. But Kevin, how have you been? What are you up to today? And what are you geeking out on?
What's up, Will? I'm doing really well. As far as updates, not really doing any other comic podcasts right now, just because I have a co-host and I've been busy, but that's why I'm excited to be here today. But just working and getting ready for the SMA conference in Disney World in a couple weeks. So I'll be there toward the end of the month. And so I still work for Bio News, writing my column, doing a podcast there, and then writing a lot of outside of work. But as far as geeking out on, so I think we talked a little bit about it on Facebook, but Barry had one of the best series finales I've ever seen. I think that is a perfect show. And I don't know if you've seen this too, but Henry Winkler is going to be coming through Quail Ridge to the NC State McKemmon Center in November because he has a book coming out. And so I am really, I already bought tickets for my parents and I for that. And so that was awesome. So the finale was excellent. Across the Spider-Verse, I've already seen twice, and it is phenomenal. I'll probably talk about that a little bit in today's episode because it ties in to a lot of multiverse and cosmology stuff. And then lastly, I'm gonna do. I don't know how long it'll take me, or if I'm gonna take it in time. But Stephen Amell is gonna be at GalaxyCon this year, so I decided to go back and start at the beginning of Arrow because it's been so long since I've seen the first few seasons, especially. And I don't know if I'm going to go through the entire series by the time I meet him, but it really is fascinating. I don't know how much you ever dived into the Arrowverse, but I was pretty invested in it for a long time. I kind of dropped off toward the latter a couple of years, but it was a lot of fun for me especially in college and for my early 20s. So it's really fun revisiting that first season before they were doing any kind of crossovers, and it was just a lot of Raimi's Spider-Man was in there, very Hamlet, Batman Begins, stuff like that. Those were the big influences.
Much more down to earth than it became.
Exactly. It's just him taking down, corrupt crime lords in the city and reemerging from the island. So it's a lot of fun going back to that.
Yeah, I kind of miss the I mean, in terms of my like bandwidth for all the stuff I geek out on, definitely the movies and some cartoons and the comics and that kind of stuff. But the kind of the CW superhero universe, I really wasn't into. Kind of missed all that. I definitely knew about it and admired it from afar, but never watched it. But that's a cool thing to go back and watch and revisit because like everything, everybody because of the MCU, everybody felt like they had to kind of tie everything in together to one collective universe.
Right.
They went down that road too. Yeah, and Kevin and I met at we have the same local comic book store, and we have run into similar circles when it comes to the Comic-Con, North Carolina Comic-Con around here in North Carolina, and I'm excited that we have cons hitting the road again, and there's one in Charlotte coming up I'm really excited about, and then North Carolina Comic-Con in November in Durham is going to happen again, so I'm pretty excited, geeking out on that. It's always fun to go to a con and cosplay and see celebrities and see the creators you love to follow. One thing I'm geeking out on, I'll share, is that, I'm not a big gamer, so I never really got into the Star Wars game of like, the Fallen Order or the Jedi Survivor, but I kind of heard about it, and then soon to be host on the show James Dimmel made a suggestion, said, "Hey, you don't have to play the games, just watch on YouTube like the movie cutscenes, like someone playing through the whole game and watch the movie cutscenes. It's almost like you're watching an animated movie." So he sent me the link to this like 3-hour show of Jedi Fallen Order, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" It's like I'm watching a whole nother Star Wars movie in continuity, animated series or movie, and I'm loving it. So I'm almost through Fallen Order. I'm gonna watch Jedi Survivor here pretty soon when I'm done with that. So geeking out on Star Wars, I'm like, new Star Wars content I didn't know that was out there. So that's what we do here at Systematic Geekology. We suggest, we geek out, and then no matter how much you know about all things geeky, there's always someone who knows something a little bit extra or makes a recommendation, and no shortage of content. Well, let's get in today's episode. Let's hop into it. This is over the last year we've had this theme of origins, where we explored fandom origins, the history behind the fandoms we love, or even the universe itself, whether it's Pokemon or whether it's an anime or something within the comic book universe, Star Wars. Like what is the origin behind it all, and what is the origin story mythology within it? And so today we're going to go into the origins and the cosmology of the Marvel universe. We've done an episode on kind of like the history of the creation of comics, like Marvel Comics, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, from timely comics evolving into Marvel Comics, and we have an episode out there on our website and backlog of episodes. You can go back and check that out. That was a lot of fun. And we might tie that in to this episode some, because there is a lot of history when it comes to like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and the creation of these characters. But today we're going to go into kind of the cosmology of the Marvel universe, not the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but the comic books itself. Earth 616, which is kind of Universe Prime, the sacred timeline within the Marvel Universe of all these heroes you love, like Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Spider-Man, the Avengers, X-Men, are rooted in Earth 616. And there's a multiverse. There's different numbers behind it. If you've just seen Spider-Man across the Spider-Verse, you'll know that there's different timelines and webs and canon events and those kinds of things that happens within the Marvel Universe. But today we're going to talk about Earth 616 and some of the history and the emergence of that universe and the cosmology around that. Josh, so what is your history with Marvel itself? Marvel proper. Again, there's no wrong or right answers. What's your history with Marvel? And then did you know before coming into this episode, know much about like the kind of like the Genesis 1 and 2 and talk about scripture, the creation story within the Marvel universe?
So, I mean, my history with Marvel as a whole it's kind of had ups and downs over the years, as with most people. I started out definitely when I was a very young kid. There was a Marvel Kids show called the Superhero Squad show. That was my absolute introduction to Marvel. It has a lot of the major players as admittedly more kid-friendly versions of themselves, but pretty much they took the absolute caricature of each of the biggest Marvel characters. You have Captain Marvel, you have Iron Man, you have Captain America, basically everybody you could think of as the main Marvel players are running around and doing kid show plot lines. But it's pretty cool because you do end up seeing at least probably at what was at that point their most common origin stories kind of all blended together so that they were somewhat coherent. So of course I started off with that, and then being one of the younger hosts, the MCU pretty much came next for me. That was definitely my next big exposure to Marvel. Ironically, I've never been a huge one on comic books. I read comics a fair bit, but I don't tend to read comic books. I tend to read web comics and stuff. It's been much more accessible for me. So I am very interested to see what you guys know more about when it comes to your more comic book backgrounds. I've had very fun conversations, especially surrounding Spider-Verse, as well as the 2 Venom movies, with a friend of mine who's very, very big into Marvel, and he keeps telling me all the stories of, especially what they're doing right now with Null and the symbiotes. And I'm like, this is a whole lot of nonsense that I didn't know was going on in the background, and I'm very interested.
Yeah, for every hero, for every villain, there's usually a long, convoluted background or a deeper story or something, some cosmic entity or villain behind it. Even if there's a big villain within the Marvel universe, there's probably something behind that goes back to the very beginning or some cosmic entity. When you think of like cosmology or the cosmic entities, you mentioned Null, but are there any others that are kind of in the zeitgeist that stand out to you and kind of jump out, kind of the big cosmic entities in the Marvel universe that you're more curious about?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's the Watcher. He's certainly one of the more interesting ones because I've always liked multiverse things. There's, just to jump all the way to the top here, I think the one above all, he's enigmatic to say the least in what I've seen of his depictions. And just talking about like really big things and things that have had major impacts on how the multiverse is formed. Galactus and the Galactus to Galactus that is the Black Winter.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued to see if you guys can tell me more than I know about those.
Yeah. You could have a PhD in one of these things. Yeah, I've scratched the surface. I feel like I know a lot, but I was pulling the thread, looking in prep before this episode. I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much here. You just hit links and keep going down rabbit holes. It went down a couple hours the other night, and I was like, man, I got to get to bed. There's a lot here. Kevin, what's your history behind kind of your introduction to the Marvel universe, whether it's comics or cartoons or movies, and then what did you know about the cosmic entities behind it all?
Yeah, so I would say, like Josh, I'm on the younger side, and so the 90s cartoons were a big influence for me and kind of big pull, both with DC and Marvel. I've talked a million times about Batman, the animated series, but likewise, Marvel was doing Spider-Man, X-Men, all of those. Incredible Hulk, which is that's probably the best Hulk adaptation we've gotten out there like that. It was only, I think, 1 season, but it's on Disney Plus, and if you've never seen that one, I highly recommend it. So the cartoons were a big gateway. And then really the first Marvel comics I ever collected were the ones that came with action figures and so the story. Because I always liked that about the Marvel Legends figures is they always included a single issue on the back of those. So getting a Thing figure or Wolverine or whatever, it would come with just a single issue, but that was a nice gateway. And then absolutely the MCU. I still remember sitting at the mall with a friend when they dropped the first images of the Iron Man suit. And that was just and even then, I hadn't read any Iron Man comics, but knew him from the cartoons. And that just opened up the mind of whoa, they're doing this. And because at that point, we had the Raimi Spider-Man films and the early X-Men stuff and all that. But that was, the MCU was just this huge eye opener for everyone. And then so I've seen every MCU movie in theaters, good and bad. So I've stuck with them for all these years. And then comics wise, it's kind of cliche, but Daredevil and Spider-Man are my favorites. So, Daredevil, what I like about Daredevil the most is you can get something like the Frank Miller run, which is really gritty and, inspired, the Netflix series and will have a huge impact, I'm sure, on the upcoming Disney Plus one. But then there's stuff like the Mark Waid run, which started around when I was in college and I collected that. And that one is really cool because it showcases some of the more levity within the character, where you can still have bad stuff happen, but that was almost more of an espionage style book, and it was really adventurous, and I really enjoyed that. And some of my favorite Spider-Man stories. I love Superior Spider-Man by Dan Slott. For those of you who don't know what that one is, it's where Doc Ock takes over the body of Peter Parker after Peter, quote unquote, dies. Of course, that doesn't last, but it's a cool concept because Otto Octavius is now in Peter's body, and he sets out to become the Superior Spider-Man. So he's not actually wanting to, like, be a supervillain anymore, but he still has a morally gray outlook on things, but it makes for such a compelling story. And actually Dan Slott, I think, announced on Twitter the other day that it's coming back in the fall. I don't know by which writer, but it was always a cool concept. And, that was before the Spider-Verse movies and everything. That was probably one of the coolest, like, experimental Spidey stories. So love that. I love the old Claremont X-Men. There's a lot of different stuff. And then as far as the cosmic entities, one of the ones I'm most interested in that I can't say I have an overwhelming knowledge of, but when Eternals came out, I wanted to read some of that. And so I read the Neil Gaiman run, which is only 7 issues. You can get it as a trade. And that one is really fascinating. I mean, Neil Gaiman's one of my favorite storytellers ever. And he took on this, like, more obscure title that really had only been done by Jack Kirby and wasn't well received. It was sort of like Jack Kirby's version of New Gods for Marvel. But it tapped into a lot of the cosmology and the big philosophical stuff. And, it has some really interesting material in there. But yeah, so that's a little bit. And then, but I'm really interested in getting your perspective on this, because I'm there. You could be just sitting on this stuff for hours and hours and only scratch the surface.
So my history with Marvel is really that's my, other than Star Wars, that's kind of my first fandom. I loved the cartoons. I'm a kid of the 70s and 80s, and so I loved the cartoons and the comics, whether it's the Super Friends or Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends, and I love those things. And so when I was reading the X-Men comics, the big cosmology the cosmic entity that really was kind of the nemesis of the X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, was the Phoenix Force. And so you not only had the X-Men, but you had this kind of like Phoenix who bonded with Jean Grey, who made her more powerful. Was she a hero? Then she became dark. And so within the cosmology of the Marvel Universe, the Phoenix is one of the first sparks that sparked life. But it also has a dark edge to it as well. There's always this kind of tension between light and dark. And then the 1980s kind of crossover event, Secret Wars, the original Secret Wars. The villain behind all that was the Beyonder, who was this kind of cosmic entity who was kind of experimenting and looking at the heroes and villains and like playing chess or playing a Pokemon game, pitting one hero against the villain and the other, and for like entertainment. It's an incredible first crossover comic book event that kind of shook everybody up, and but the Beyonders behind all that, and of course Galactus. But as you kind of pull on these threads, like we said, you have these heroes. It's not just Spider-Man who was bit by a spider and became a superhero with spider powers, but behind it, perhaps there's a Madam Web or a Spider God or a web of multiverse that they go deeper into. Not only is Venom just a symbiote kind of villain an alien they brought back from outer space and bonded with Spider-Man, but little did you know that there is a dark god called Null, who's king of all the symbiotes and created the dark sword and created chaos behind it all. Not only do you have Galactus, who is a world eater, a huge giant who gets nourishment by sucking the energy off of planets, but come to find out, he was the survivor of another dead universe, the sole survivor of a dead universe brought to our own. So you have these kind of stories behind it all, and that's really what's going on here in the Marvel universe. You have the heroes, you have Earth, you have villains, heroes fighting against villains and fighting for truth, justice, and all that. But you also have behind it, what's behind it all? Was the author of good and evil? What are the gods or celestial beings behind it all? And so, a recommendation I'll make that really what I read and prep for this, which I will highly suggest for everyone. I'm doing recommendations a little earlier, but there's a book called The History of the Marvel Universe by Mark Waid and Javier Rodriguez. And it's a graphic novel. The art is absolutely incredible. Mark Waid is a powerhouse in the comic book world in terms of his knowledge and history of DC and Marvel, and has written for both. And so he kind of lays out the entire history, beginning at like the beginning when there was nothing, like the Big Bang, when there was dark, when there was void in the beginning, and then things start to emerge. So they start there. And the premise of this book is pretty neat. It starts with, at the end of time, you only have two beings left, Franklin Richards and Galactus. And it's the end of, it's the last entropy. And so it's the end of time. And so those are only two left. And it's kind of, the Fantastic Four and Galactus are kind of the origins of kind of the modern day Marvel universe. So why wouldn't they be there at the end? And they start to reflect on kind of the history of the Marvel universe. So they start from the very beginning and start reflecting on things. And so, what they share is that the Earth 616 emerged from the death of another universe, and the sole survivor of that universe was Galen. Galactus was the sole survivor, and so in the midst of the death of one universe, in the midst of the void and the darkness, there became like these echoes of energies that then emerged as cosmic beings. So you had eternity, which is like the personification of the universe itself, and then you had Master Order and Lord Chaos. And so you have order and chaos pulling and pulling against one another, similar to what we find in Genesis chapter 1, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the deep. Again, God's a surfer. Go back and read it, Genesis 1, 2. But you have like this tension between the Creator and chaos, and then order emerging out of it. So you have this tension on the line between Master Order and Lord Chaos. And of course, in the midst of that conflict, in the midst of these cosmic energies trying to find its place in the universe, the Infinity Gems are formed, kind of the space-time, reality, death, life, time emerge in these cosmic gems. And in the midst of that, there became these other celestial beings, literally these celestials, and I think I'm saying this right, the aspirants, 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 were these celestials.
Aspirants?
And there was this aspirants, who they were more of the conservative side of the celestials, who wanted to kind of keep things the same and just kind of keep each other company. The celestials, the more colorful rainbow celestials of different colored, red and yellow and green and orange, like they emerged, and they wanted to see more evolution and change and growth in the universe. They were more, satisfied or intrigued by experimenting with the universe and letting the universe kind of go in all these different kind of directions. And so they had a disagreement, but aspirants and the celestials had a celestial war. And of course, a lot of the world religions and myths behind it all have this creation story that perhaps Earth was created out of the war of the gods. You go to Genesis and there's no war. That's kind of the subversive nature of Genesis. It's not like it's a science book or anything, but really what the Hebrews were trying to say was like, look, we didn't come out or derive from the blood of dead, defeated gods, but rather God created us and said, it is good. And you have a mission and a purpose. Well, a lot of different religions, mythologies, creation stories emerge out of this war between the gods. And then we're kind of the fallout, humanity's kind of the fallout of this war going on. And so in the midst of the celestial war, you have different entities kind of taking sides and the universe taking shape, at least Earth 616. And you have the Beyonders, you have Galactus, you have Null, you have Ego, you have all these kind of celestial beings kind of taking sides and going on their different directions of creating the universe.
Yeah, because I think one of the big differences between Marvel and DC is like gods becoming humans, or at least walking among humanity, and Marvel is more people becoming godlike, and so I think of the more celestial stuff when I think of DC. and Kirby, I mein, it goes without saying, was always the one to tackle stuff like that. A Fantastic Four is very much, a reflection of, at that time when he came up with Fantastic Four, the society's interest in aliens and otherworldly stuff, and answering questions of, are we alone in the universe, and getting to really heavy origin stuff. So I think he really uh, tapped into all of those questions with stuff like Fantastic Four, New Gods, Eternals. So in terms of Marvel, yeah, I mean, the Eternals I really like. Of course, Galactus, stuff like that, and Guardians of the Galaxy. More so with the movies, but there's some really good comics there as well.
Yeah, that's a good segue, because I was just talking about kind of the graphic novel that Mark Waid and Javier Rodriguez did, The History of the Marvel Universe. And they kind of start there at the beginning with Franklin Richards and Galactus kind of telling the story of the Marvel Universe, and this tension between like the cosmic entities and the Celestials emerging. And a part of the Celestial story is that, yeah, they wanted to kind of experiment, but then allow the universe to kind of grow and emerge. That you out of the Celestials also created the Eternals, which are these beings that are there to help creation around and do its thing on Earth. But then all of a sudden, you have these deviants who are kind of trying to derail the evolution of mankind and Earth, and they're there to stop the deviants and kind of work behind the scenes and not let the Avengers or the other heroes know. Now you go that's Kirby trying to recreate the New Gods here in the Marvel Universe, and they kind of tied in with all that. But then eventually you get to kind of the last decade or so. One of the big architects of the cosmology of the Marvel Universe is Jonathan Hickman. Who's did some stuff with Secret Wars, who's done some stuff with the Singularity and these Celestials and the heroes and the science behind it all. Man, you need like some big chart and map to kind of follow his train of thought. He's going to be at HeroCon next week. I hope I get a chance to meet him. Yeah, I got some stuff to sign from him. But yeah, you have these kind of cosmic entities that are kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes, but sometimes getting in the way. And that's where, as Josh talked about the Watcher, Uatu, right? I say Utua. I never could pronounce the big cosmology.
I think that's correct, but I don't.
Yeah. Watches the universe from what's that, Josh?
I think you were right in the first shot, Uatu.
And he watches from a distance, but then, man, as he's watching, he grows fond. It's hard to watch something and invest in it and not care for it. And so the first time he really emerges and kind of warns the Marvel Universe is when Galactus is coming and has to kind of help out the Fantastic Four. And like this is what's happening behind it all. And so you have the Watchers there. But yeah, people play with these in the stories all the time. And I think it's neat. You have like you said, the grounded hero of like the Daredevil in Hell's Kitchen fighting the villain of the week to try to keep that neighborhood safe. But then there's also a bigger story behind it all, not just the Earth, not just our solar system, but also our entire universe and even the multiverse. Like we talked about, this is Marvel 616. Prime proper, but there's the omniverse, there's a multiverse, there's different ways to look at it all, and it can get confusing, but it's also a creative way just to tell a good story. Josh, as you hear me kind of talk about this graphic novel thing, are there something that jumps out to you or a question to clarify? Not that I understand it all, but hearing all that kind of laid out, what comes to mind for you?
So, I mean, first off, I knew a good deal about Galactus, Galen, and how he came from one of the previous worlds. And so, yeah, it makes sense that he would survive till the end of the next one. What made Franklin Richards able to survive to the end of a universe?
Good question. I'll chime in, then Kevin, if you fill in the gaps. I believe because he is not only the son of like the smartest man and the Invisible Woman embedded by cosmic rays, but he's also a mutant, and so his mutant powers, when they came to being, his mutant power is to alter reality. And so he's kind of not necessarily like the Scarlet Witch that can put spells on things, but his abilities, whether they're controlled or not, he can alter reality. And so there's one storyline in the 90s where he created a whole different like counter Earth, and as Heroes Reborn is what is the kind of the arc, and created almost an entire pocket universe just from his own being. And so as he grows and matures and what I understand from this particular graphic novel, and just the potential behind Franklin Richards is that he can become the most powerful being in the universe because he can alter reality, almost become a god himself, and can alter reality. So he's the one who would survive at the end because he can alter reality. Kevin, am I missing anything there?
No, I'd say, you're more knowledgeable there, but I think that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting how they explore that in the MCU going forward. I like introducing Kang before Fantastic Four. I'm really, curious. Like, I didn't really love Quantumania, but it does tap into some interesting concepts.
Yep. And I'm a sucker for a good alternate timeline, what if story, multiverse, because I feel like you can just play so much and without getting too crazy about continuity and canon for these characters you love. You can tweak Spider-Man or a character you love and if you mess it up, just say, oh, that was a different version. It was a different timeline. Let's go back to the reason what's going on. I don't mind that trope. I think it's fun to play around with. But yeah, that's why Franklin Richards is behind that. And then another aspect is these Celestials create the Beyonders or Beyonder to kind of guard the multiverse. I think as I was reading that they're the ones who created the cosmic cube as well. And the cosmic cube or maybe there's more than one cosmic cubes are infused with, help control matter and energy and time. And so a villain, of course, would want that before they got the Infinity Gems or Infinity Stones, because, hey, what villain or hero wouldn't want to control matter and energy and reality and time? So there are little pockets of these kind of godlike powers that Beyonders created. And then there's some on Earth. And so you can see where that's played out. Good question. Other things that stood out or things that you're curious about when it comes to these cosmic entities?
Just personally, the Beyonder, just a little bit more depth on who exactly the Beyonder is, because I've heard a little bit about most different things when it comes in. Like, I know about the Celestials and the Eternals and Dark Winter and all those. But Beyonder, I think I've heard the name thrown around here or there, but I really couldn't. For most of them, if I was pressed, I could give you like a little synopsis, what they vaguely are. I could not tell you a thing about who the Beyonder is.
Yeah, I think, I think it's one of those characters that people can do what they want with them depending on who's writing them. I know the Beyonder in the original Secret Wars from the 1980s, that big 12-issue crossover event, was just someone who was behind it all, a cosmic energy who just was like wanted to play chess with the heroes and villains of Earth. And then you kind of Secret Wars 2 went into like more of his background of like where he came from. And then Hickman changed it around a little bit, and his Secret Wars made it a little different. It wasn't necessarily a reboot or telling the same story. It was literally the collapse of the Ultimate Universe, the Marvel Ultimate Universe, into Earth 616, and then Doctor Doom getting powers from the Beyonders to kind of control and alter reality itself with Molecule Man, who can control matter. But the Beyonders are these kind of from what I read and dug in background, were creatures created either by Celestials or some cosmic beings to be protectors of the multiverse, there to help guide, not necessarily Time Lords like you would think in Doctor Who, but they're kind of there to help guide and direct and protect. And of course, whenever you have these kind of beings, you have the fallen angel, you have the rebel, you have those who want to do things their own way and don't do things correctly or deviate from what they're meant to be and cause trouble that then the heroes have to correct or fight against. So that's all I know, but that's a great question. And maybe they'll go more into that when it gets into like the Secret Wars or Secret Invasion, those kinds of things when we get into the MCU. Yeah. So again, like you can pull a string on any one of these cosmic entities, and I will for our listeners. Like if you want to deep dive, pull up Celestials on your Wikipedia page, or just like the Marvel fandom kind of encyclopedia page, and then click those hyperlinks to start going down rabbit holes. Click Celestial War, and that'll keep you going. Null. The god of the symbiotes, the Beyonders, or others. It'll take you down these roads of unveiling what's behind the universe. And kind of what I take from is like, again, like you have these boots on the ground, the heroes and villains, but there's something behind it. And I like to think about that in our own lives, in our own world. I have my everyday life. I have my, my daily routine. I drive to work. I love the restaurants I go to. I have my family to take care of. I want to feed my dog. I want to connect with my friends. But man, who doesn't think, is there something behind all this? Is there a cosmic entity beyond all this? Is there something pulling the strings, or do I have freedom in that? Or is there someone set things in motion and allow us some freedom to create and grow and be ourselves? So all those questions are explored within these stories as well. And in my own personal story, that's kind of what I feel like. There's the mundane, the everyday, normal stuff. But man, my imagination, my spirituality, my faith believes there's something beyond myself behind it all, both good and perhaps devious. Or there's order and there's chaos. And then what team am I on? What am I playing? What am I creating in my own life? Am I a hero? Am I a villain? Those kinds of things. Fellas, what if you could connect your own story with one of these cosmic entities, or if you wanted to see one of these Marvel universe cosmic entities a part of your own story, if you wanted to be a part of theirs, what would you choose, or what intrigues you that you would want to play out in your own lives? Josh, why don't you hop in? What is something that intrigues you that you wouldn't mind connected with your own story?
I mean, I've definitely always been a sucker for the Spider-Verse, and just, even before that was the term for it, just do all of the, like, that was definitely the movies I first grew up on, even before the MCU came out, was the original Amazing Spider-Man trilogy. I've just always liked that. I would definitely want to do, I think that's what I want to do. I want to do being one of the spiders, maybe even seeing the symbiotes come out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what King in Black, that's a good series. Donny Cates writing about Null and the symbiotes, and behind that, I mean, it's also connected to the Silver Surfer. It's also connected to Thor. It's also connected to, we didn't even talk about the Asgardians as part of like the mythological, the world tree. I mean, there's so much to go down on any of these kind of storylines, but yeah, I do like that development too. And I think Into the Spider-Verse went to that as well, with these webs and different universe and multiverse, but also canon events, which I think is real. We just had an episode about that where we talked about what our own canon event, what would they be? What would stick? If there's different versions of Will, which one is like the continuity between it all that would be a part of every single part of different Will's stories. But yeah, that's a good one. Kevin, what cosmic entity intrigues you that you wouldn't mind being plugged into or part of in the Marvel universe?
Well, I say there's few that I wouldn't, but to carry off on the Spider-Verse stuff. I mean, I'm also a huge Spidey fan, and Will, have you seen Across the Spider-Verse yet?
Yeah, twice.
Okay, see, that's same. So like, it asks. I don't want to spoil it for listeners who haven't seen it yet, but it asks really interesting questions about this whole idea of like canon and story and free will, and like, do certain things have to happen in order for things to sustain, because like, and are you willing to put the person you love the most or the people you love the most above the needs of the universe? And it's just like, oh, it's so compelling. So I want to bring that up, but yeah, I don't know. Is the question more like, what do you feel resonates with your story the most, or would you just want to be a part of?
Either one.
Or a little both. Either one. Like, because I would really love to be a part of Asgard. I think too, especially because like I mean, the movies are one thing, but if you want some really good Thor stories, read the Walt Simonson run. That really taps into the intricacies of how fantastical a world it is, and that's where it's so interesting because it's Thor going back and forth, and while he's on Earth, he uses secret identity and stuff, and so which they never really did in the movies, and it's really funny. But I would love to be a part of that. I'd love to be about the Spider-Verse. I also find like with Guardians, I find like Adam Warlock a really compelling character. I know he's more kind of like sort of. I mean, I really enjoyed Guardians 3, but he was kind of like more of a side character there. But he has a really rich history, and you know, and as a villain, I was reading up on High Evolutionary after the movie, and that's also someone who is like I had never known about before Guardians 3, but this is not someone I think I would want to hang out with, but like but it's a really interesting one in terms of like he's had dealings with Apocalypse and Mr. Sinister, and you know his whole idea is separating him from Thanos is he wants to create a perfect society, and he's willing to like go through all kinds of tests and sacrifices in order to make that happen. So it's the whole Guardians mythology explores some really interesting stuff, but yeah, as far as I definitely think, as far as what reflects my own story the most, definitely Spider-Man is always. I mean, there's just a reason he's so universally relatable. And now with the Spider-Verse, you get to see yours like you know, someone may not relate to Peter Parker the most, but then you also have Miles and Gwen and all these other iterations that you can see yourself in some way. Because I think we've all felt like outsiders at some point, but also wanting to be a part of something bigger, and that's really at the core of Spider-Man.
Yeah. And yeah, it goes to the kind of the cosmology. I think my favorite Psalms is Psalm 8. And within that, it kind of, you know, when I look at the heavens and I consider the heavens, what are we that you're mindful of us? And, you know, who hasn't looked at the stars or the galaxy or the constellations and thought, man, is there something bigger than myself, or what do I belong to bigger than me? And I that's the eternal question that I think conscious beings ask, you know. For me, I think I like the Galactus kind of story too. And of course, you know, a bald surfer is going to connect with Silver Surfer. And so this kind of herald of Galactus, this herald who's riding a cosmic surfboard through the stars, hunting down planets for this you know, being to consume. And really the heart and the angst there behind Silver Surfer is he tries to find planets that doesn't have conscious beings on it, so that it's not really killing anybody. But then you come upon Earth, and he rebels against his master because he sees a larger cosmic good, that there's a moral arc to the universe, and he wants to be a part of it. So Silver Surfer I connect with. I've never really found like an ongoing like run that I've connected with a whole lot. There is Donnie Cakes. I think Trad Moore did one with Silver Surfer.
Dan Slott, I haven't read it, but he has a really acclaimed Silver Surfer run as well.
Yeah. So that intrigues me a lot. And again, like there's so much there. I love it that there's a long history with the Marvel Universe in terms of how it was created by its own creators like Stan Lee and them, but also within it, the creators themselves laying out, trying to do something creatively different, but also building upon what was written before them. And that's kind of what we're all called to do, right? We all have our own stories, but we're also called to build on what others have created before as well. So again, we'll recommend that graphic novel, History of the Marvel Universe, and then let us know if we missed anything, or if there's a cosmic entity that you connect with that we didn't dive into. Let us know on the social medias and reach out to us and let us know. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. We have an extra question that we're going to ask here in a minute for those who subscribe on our Captivate website and channel. We'll ask that question here in a minute. But yeah, follow us, rate and review, hit us up on the socials, share with a friend, and we are super excited to be a part of this universe, the Systematic Geekology universe with you. And remember always, the geek in us honors the geek in you.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network.